arrested during the coup in August. The United Nations warns that hate speech in Guinea's election campaigns could lead to violence. Plus, South Sudan suspends the renovation of Juba National Stadium after a partial collapse of the facility. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Teniola Shoboale. We begin today in Mali, where former Prime Minister Boubé Cissé and other officials and military personnel detained during the August coup have been released. The release was one of the demands of international powers, including ECOWAS, which this week lifted economic sanctions against Mali after the appointment of the transitional government. The senior figures had been held since the ousting of President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta, which alarmed Mali's foreign partners, who feared it would further destabilize Mali and undermine a joint fight against Islamist militants in the wider Sahel region. Let's get more on this story from the Director General of the Bolitag Center of International Diplomacy and Strategic Studies, Professor Bola Akiterewa. Thank you so much for joining us on the program, Professor.
Thank you.
What's the significance of the release of the political detainees in Mali on the country's democratic process?
I think it is significant at four complementary different levels. At the level of France, it is quite significant, meaning that France wouldn't have to face any confrontation with the regional body. It is very significant for Mali itself because Mali is currently saddled with a multidimensional problem, ranging from terrorism, the problem of Tuareg, the problem that a major part of the Malian territory has been occupied effectively by, insurgents here and there, poverty, all this. So Mali cannot afford the luxury of deepening its problem by accepting to do, contrary to what the ECOWAS is asking for. Again, it is quite significant at the level of Nigeria. Nigeria, though far away a member state of the ECOWAS, is always directly challenged by any French position there. France doesn't want any of the Francophone countries to be influenced against her by Nigeria. And Nigeria also does not want France to be a major obstacle to any protection of Nigeria's interests in the Francophone countries, including Mali. So now that we are now having a sort of detente, lessening of tension in Mali with the compliance, with the release of the detainees as wanted by the ECOWAS, I think this more or less a win-win outcome for all the stakeholders involved.
So, Professor, so far, Mali has been trying to appease ECOWAS, but although a transitional government has been, the coup leader, Goïta, remains in the government as vice president in charge of security and defense issues. Do you think is this a threat to the new government in power?
Well, the issue is that, as I've said, that there are different competing interests. If you look at the interest of Mali in this particular case, the interest of Mali is about self-protection. It's more or less of exercise of national sovereignty. It is the people of Mali that gave an active support to the protesters, to the removal, to the ousting of Keïta. So in this case, as we do have the military government there, let me say with the influence of the military members in the government. We cannot say that the interest of the people, the popular people, is not there. So I want to believe that as it is the people's government there, even though we have the military, a former defense chief, as the transitional president, while those who actually engage in the coup is a second in command. This arrangement, I think, is quite acceptable to the ECOWAS. And that's why the ECOWAS in itself has agreed to, removing the sanctions for now against the Malian government.
Okay, so far so good on that end. ECOWAS has already lifted sanctions imposed on Mali. But then we have the United States, which says it's still suspending military assistance to Mali until elections are held in the next 18 months. What impact will this have on the country and the region's security, do you think?
If the Americans provide military assistance?
Yes, so far the United States has said that it will withhold military assistance until elections are held in the next 18 months. What impact do you think this will have on the country and the region's security as a whole?
Very little at best. Very little, because assistance to Mali can be directly given or indirectly. The mere fact that you have France acting effectively in Mali, there is no disputing the fact that the interests of the NATO countries, North Atlantic Treaty Organization countries, the interests are protected. Look, you see, the beauty of it all is that when you look at Article 3 of the NATO Alliance Agreement, you see there's a provision that an attack on any member state is considered an attack on all. And that was why France, right from time immemorial, before it ceased being a member militarily, asking that anything that's going to warrant a contribution of troops, the concept of France must be sought. France was the one allowed to act on behalf of all the Western countries. So, if the Americans decide to withhold any military assistance, that will not prevent the French from giving military assistance. That will not prevent the Chinese from coming in. At the end of the day, the withholding of military assistance by the United States will only create a vacuum that many countries will just be too eager to occupy.
All right, then, Professor Akinterewa, a lot to look forward to in the coming months. Thank you once more for joining us on Network Africa. It's always interesting having your thoughts on the program.
Thank you. It's much of a pleasure having me.
Elsewhere in West Africa, the United Nations has warned that continued invoking of ethnic affiliations and hate speech in Guinea's election campaigns could lead to violence. The UN rights boss, Michelle Bachelet, and acting special advisor on the prevention of genocide, Pramila Patten, have therefore urged candidates to refrain from hate speech. President Alpha Condé, who is seeking a controversial third term, is largely backed by Malinke people, while his main opponent, Selou Darlin Diallo, is largely backed by Fulani people. Guinea is set to hold presidential elections on October 18th. So far, at least 50 people have been killed during demonstrations against the president's third-term bid. 3 weeks before elections, the Tanzanian government is getting scared and will do all in its power to stop the opposition. That's according to opposition leader and presidential hopeful Tundu Lissu. Mr. Lissu from the main opposition Chadema party says the party offices in Arusha, northern Tanzania, have been firebombed. Meanwhile, dozens of opposition parliamentary candidates were disqualified from running in the elections for president and members of parliament, which take place on October 28th.
The campaigning so far, if I speak of a span of the past 1 month, it has gone relatively well. During the first few weeks, we campaigned fairly, very well. The police were very courteous, very professional. But lately, the atmosphere has changed rather dramatically. I think as the political temperatures arising from our campaign have gone up, the regime is getting scared, and therefore they're pulling out all the stops, as it were, using every instrument of power in their capacity, in their possession, to thwart my election campaign. The police have been abusing their authority with complete impunity. The kind of violence that we are seeing, we're beginning to see, is different.
In North Africa, Sudan's main port has reopened after a 3-day blockade by protesters who also forced the closure of the road linking the eastern city of Port Sudan with the capital, Khartoum. Members of the Beja tribe complained that they had been excluded from a peace deal aimed at resolving long-running conflicts in the country. They said the agreement had been signed by a rival tribe, the Beni Emir, with whom they have been clashing for several months. The deal between the government and an alliance of rebel groups was signed on Saturday. The authorities in South Sudan have suspended the renovation of Juba National Stadium, a project sponsored by the World Football governing body, FIFA, after a partial collapse of the facility. Parts of the stadium collapsed on Tuesday afternoon during construction, sparking public outcry on social media. The renovation of the 7,500-seater stadium, estimated to cost $6 million, was expected to be completed by the end of the year. The construction company, GS Construction, has denied allegations that some workers were injured in the incident. FIFA has not commented on the matter. Now, hundreds of thousands of Egyptians are facing a deadline at the end of October by which residents of buildings without permits, mostly in poor areas, must apply to regularize their property for a fee or face demolition. Officials say that the law introduced last year is part of a crackdown on illegal buildings that violate safety standards, hinder traffic and development, and encroach on arable land.
Egypt's housing development is part of a drive by President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi to upgrade infrastructure and housing and deal with decades of haphazard construction that accelerated after a 2011 uprising. But for some residents, the demolition threat is a fresh blow after years of economic austerity, rising prices, and most recently, the fallout from the coronavirus. Leilani Faha, who visited Egypt as UN Special Rapporteur on the Rights to Housing in 2018 and now heads The Shift, a housing rights group, says the campaign risks indebting the poor.
Many of the people who are building are, of course, not wealthy and don't have the resources to pay a fine. You cannot squeeze water from a stone. This we all know. You cannot squeeze money from people who are poor. They have no money to pay a fine. So it doesn't seem logical to me.
Residents say they have struggled to pay a settlement fee of between £50 and £2,000 per square meter.
People are living under such stress right now with this pandemic, with poverty, and with the threat of eviction. If you don't have enough money to pay for a permit to reconcile your lands. I mean, that is very stressful.
The government campaign has led to tensions in some communities. In Sayakos, a village outside Cairo, bulldozers destroyed 4 informal buildings in late August before the deadline expired. Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli says the fees, which can be paid over 3 years, would be invested in improving infrastructure.
Many citizens in different areas complained a lot about the fact that the required fines are too expensive and that they won't be able to pay. We started to work on the ground because our aim from this law is to solve the problem. We are not in conflict with the citizens.
Officials say they are also battling to conserve limited arable land. Egypt's population hits 100 million this year, 97% of whom live on just 8% of the desert country's territory along the Nile.
Still to come on the program. An Egyptian artist uses medicine pills to cope with grief. Details in a moment. Stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. Demonstrators have taken to the streets of Namibia's capital to protest against gender-based violence after the body of a woman who was discovered in a shallow grave in the second city, Walvis Bay. The body of Shannon Wasefall, who went missing 6 months ago, was discovered after police were tipped off by an anonymous text message. Miss Wasefall had dropped off her son at a friend's house before heading out to meet someone. Local media reports say people have been urged to wear black today and on Friday to show solidarity with victims of gender-based violence. To our coverage of the COVID-19 pandemic now, the mayor of Tunisia's capital, Tunis, says that a nighttime curfew will be reinstated for 2 weeks as part of measures aimed at controlling the spread of the coronavirus, which has significantly risen in recent weeks. The curfew will also be imposed in the neighboring provinces of Manuba, Ariana and Benarus. Since July, there were only a few soft measures in place to control the rate of infection in Tunisia. But in the past month alone, over 20,000 people have tested positive for COVID-19. Weekly markets and Friday prayers have also been banned, and cafes and restaurants can no longer have seated areas. In the meantime, the World Health Organization says there is hope for a COVID-19 vaccine to be ready by the end of this year. While speaking at the WHO's Executive Board meeting in Geneva, the Director General advocated investing in tools and new technology needed to fight the pandemic.
The most important thing now is investing in or using all the tools at hand. And many countries have shown that with the tools we have, they were able to suppress and control the pandemic. But at the same time, we have to invest in new technology. And that's why we launched the ACT Accelerator. We will need vaccines. And there is hope that by the end of this year, we may have a vaccine. There is hope.
In Somalia, hundreds of thousands of children have been immunized against measles and polio during a vaccination campaign to curb the ongoing outbreaks of the diseases. The strain of polio that is in circulation is different from the wild polio virus recently declared as eradicated from Africa, but it can also put communities where not enough children have been vaccinated at risk and leave children paralyzed for life. The strain of polio has paralyzed 19 children since late 2017.
The first part of the polio vaccination campaign took place in the Bernardir region, which includes and surrounds the capital city of Mogadishu. It is home to the largest number of displaced people in Somalia and a hub for Somalis traveling internationally. In Somalia, 1 in 7 children dies before their 5th birthday, and in many cases, these deaths are preventable by use of vaccines.
We carried out the vaccination campaign after new cases of measles were confirmed in the city. Since measles is a deadly disease, we had to contain it to save our children, sensitize the public against the dangers of polio and measles, and make sure that the children are vaccinated.
It is for this reason that Nadifo Sira Dali is waiting with her 3 children in a long line at the Maternal and Child Health Center in Mogadishu under a hot morning sun.
All my children are now healthy, so I have no fear, even if there is an outbreak, because I know they are vaccinated.
The campaign was organized by the Federal Ministry of Health with support from the WHO, the UN's Children's Fund UNICEF, the Global Polio Education Initiative, and Gavi.
Finally on the program, an Egyptian artist is using medicine pills to cope with grief while raising awareness on mental health struggles. Let's have a look.
When her mother passed away, 35-year-old Egyptian artist Amal Salah held on to many of her possessions as she struggled to cope with her grief. Among her late mother's belongings was a hospital bag full of her medication, which got Salah angry because they failed to save her life.
My mother passed away a year ago. She was sick for a long time. She got sick all of a sudden, a great illness. She spent a lot of time in the intensive care unit. I realized at the time that I will not be able to get out of this state. Among the things that I took to her was her medication. I was angry at these pills. I felt they did nothing. They were useless. We bought them for nothing. I felt that I wanted to use them for something else, since they didn't work for their primary purpose.
Salah instead used the pills to design colorful mosaic portraits that she says mirrored her mental and emotional struggle. Among her portraits are ones of American singer Sia and the late Amy Winehouse, artists that Salah listened to during her recovery. Other portraits, many hung around her home, read "Resist," "Rebel," and "What is your drug?" Some are made of leaflets she found inside medicine boxes. Salah has a degree in architecture and runs a design studio that experiments with various materials and mixed media to produce artwork for people's homes and workspaces.
And that's the program today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Teniola Shobowale.